gosh.
Really?
That's
Yeah.
I didn't even know it was an interview.
Put on a kid
Oh,
pause
hi.
first. Hold it. Hold it.
Hi,
Hi.
good to see you, Mark.
Good to see you. All right, so I think this is already,
Okay, Larry, go ahead.
You know,
Okay.
Interrupt your train of thought.
2:55.
2:55, yep.
uh,
Make a little room up here.
who his real first name was, what the J stands for.
When Harry S. Truman, the S doesn't stand for anything. It's just the middle of it. Just the middle.
No, who's
Harry S. Truman is just S.
Yeah.
But the J stands for something.
Yeah.
I don't know whose hat. Is that your hat, Bernie? Maybe that's your hat?
Common name.
Hi, Larry.
Hi, Bridget, how are you?
Not too bad, thank you. And you?
We're good, we're good, we're good.
History book.
Can't complain. Let's see.
Hi, Paula.
Hi, Billy. How are you today?
Okay, thank you. And you?
Good, thanks. You're keeping in because it's so cold.
Well,
It's a good day to be inside.
No, I want to actually watch you later.
Yeah, go ahead.
Monday.
Yeah, I just want to translation some Yiddish.
No, the land.
My pleasure, if I
Federal
can.
government.
Yeah, you definitely-
Well, if I use it, then I can.
Involved in depressions.
Well, didn't FDR institute the federal tax? Before that, it was only state and local tax.
No,
Or
So
did we
leave it
ever
in
have
here.
a federal tax before FDR?
federal income tax was started by Woodrow Wilson in
That's
19.
ambitious already.
Okay.
It wasn't that much. It wasn't.
I could write you a check, right?
Sure.
Tax, and it only reached really, wealthy people.
Hello.
It was a start.
So what did Eisenhower exactly say about the historical office? Beware of the military industrial complex.
Shall we start with Matovo? Page 13.
Page 15.
So why did the American government
Just gonna wait a few more minutes.
Accompany yourself on the tambourine.
it's happening over there? Kind of like the gold dumped it on our laps.
Because we believe in the domino theory. That if we didn't stop communism there, it would.
Susan?
Hi, how you doing? Hi, hi,
Hi.
Robin. Hi.
What was Johnson's main advisor?
McNamara?
The fog of war.
McNamara?
Yeah, how did he, work for the Ford Motor Company, get to advise politically Johnson on foreign affairs?
Yeah, that's a great question.
He didn't have the,
Because he was Kennedy's
Oh,
secretary. He stayed on.
Really?
Kennedy.
I guess everyone.
and he did not want to go to Vietnam in the first place.
He's really, he's very important, but the advisors who was favor, W.W. Ross, George Bundy,
Dean Rusk.
Dean Rusk. It was the height of the Cold War, and he
We
went
were
in.
coming out of McCarthyism. Yeah.
He went in very
It's her brother. Could that be?
It is.
go in. Really, and what I really gonna try to get out after his re-election in 1964. Well,
Can you hear us okay?
because it didn't.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Good.
Owen Johnson said, "I shall not seek." And it will accept.
Just gonna wait like 3 more minutes to start.
Really shocked the country. Ooh.
Not very many people are there. Can he hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I won't talk about you.
Okay.
Is anyone there in person?
Yes, so far there are 5 of us here, including me.
Okay,
He was doing quite well.
So there's still plenty of seats left.
Okay, we have your book and we'd like you to sign it for us.
Oh, I'd love to.
Well, it's got
Claire has read it and I'm about to.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
John F. Kennedy assassination. If this
Huh?
is
Holy shit.
Yeah.
a lie
You think the
to
CIA
Six
was
people.
behind this assassination?
His iPad, just
What?
underneath the iPad, John.
You're reading it.
Live fine too big to fail. Lisa Peace. Pease.
Oh,
Lie
okay.
too big.
Hi,
Hi,
Hi there.
hi, all, Anita.
hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello,
Hello, hello.
hello.
Hi,
Good morning.
it's afternoon. He's not just waking up.
That's okay.
Is he dressed?
It asked
He
me,
was in
the
front
theater I
of
work at, they're doing this amazing play about
And he
Bizarre
shot-
Vengeance.
he shot- he was shooting blanks.
De Nacht is Azoi Shane, the night is beautiful, the
There
rain
was
is
at least
so beautiful.
four
The
other
Rhein is
shooters.
Azoi fresh, the rain is fresh.
Yeah.
Azoi in the lift, in the air,
I think
everything
not.
smells in the good.
Nope.
Sein, de Tate hat mich geschlagen, the dad hit me.
Yeah.
Before the FBI and the
This
CIA.
Stim, hide the key.
He said it himself.
You know what, I have to
to
get a picture of you.
Nazi.
Okay.
Come over, look at it.
He was-
Jack Ruby actually got it.
was
Okay.
mafia.
Can you hear our conversation in,
Yes,
okay,
Part of it.
can't make it all out, though.
okay. So what I'll do is, maybe I'll put things on mute, but you can unmute yourself.
This-
Okay.
I'm gonna read for a while and then hopefully people will have some questions.
Oh, it's 68.
And, so then, you can always unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay,
32 and
let's start.
2018, it's like 50 years. And this woman did a lot. She was working full time. She spent.
No, you don't need it. Those are for sale, though. You don't need to follow it. Hopefully you can listen to it and follow, because I'll read slowly and hopefully clearly. Let me know if I don't. Okay, so the first poem is called Saturday.
How about we try to shut up our
Okay.
phones off?
Good idea.
We don't want people's phones going off during.
All
this.
right.
I'm gonna turn mine off.
It's not a service, but we're treating it like it.
We are?
Aren't we?
No. Okay, Saturday. I was born on a Saturday, 10:47 a.m. An inch of snow coating Astoria, Queens. A mid-December day of sirens and corks jetting from dark chilled bottles. A day of bus exhaust belching blue-gray into the frigid air. Assembly lines greasing the cogs of America's wheels, stitching gloves for the coming frost. Trees in their barren beauty, the browns of bark climbing out of the planted sidewalks, bountiful brick. The gardens of Sunnyside were mostly soil, dark, gritty, rocky, and shrubbed, a dented hubcap or two, seeds in their deep sleep. In every borough, there was singing in synagogues that morning, parchment unscrolled on felt-covered tables, chanting of Jacob's return to the wilderness of his youth, camels on the horizon bearing clay jugs, smooth to the touch, humps festooned with fig cakes, shawls draped on the soft hair of their backs. I was wrested out of the womb, dumped wailing into the Western world, into a century wounded by wars. Lying on the belly of all that maternity, the web of veins, the life heaving in our chests, idling at a high pitch, in the 1951 of high fidelity, of housewives herded into suburbs, the hit parade of love and marriage, the promise of stainless steel. Tarnished from the vantage of my sparse coat of snowy hair, the brittle reward for those who wait, the whir of propellers in the distant background, the hum of the decades to come. The propellers in the distant background were, I live not far from LaGuardia Airport, just a few miles from LaGuardia Airport, and the planes would descend over our house. not exactly over our house, but very close by. If there are any little references that, if there are any references that people might not get, I'll try to explain them before. My father's hands held the blue globe, displaying the distance between our births, the slow trek of continents, the vast, wet, and dizzying spin, my mother singing to herself at the sink. His hands gripped the steering wheel, white walls and wide turns, the fat-assed fins of late 50s Detroit, the AM channels chatter, songs squeezed between commercials, his foil-lined ashtray buried in the mentholated butts of cools, subways rattling overhead. A collision of cultures between the front seat and back, the schoolyard banter native to New York, and an accent importing a world half an atlas away. Refusing reparations for his snuffed-out generations, my father's hands split the unruly Atlantic, gently stroked my cheek. Further notes from the underground. Okay, there are a few references here. So I was born in Sunnyside, Queens, so Sunnyside going to be mentioned. It happened to be that the main subway stop in Sunnyside is called Bliss Street. Just happens to be. The subway that went there, now it's called the 7 line, but in those days it was called the IRT. It was one of the IRT lines. There were 3 lines, BMT, IRT, IND. IRT was the Flushing line. I mentioned Oscar Williams, who had a very famous anthology of great poetry, which I was given in a class in 12th grade. And Willets Point was the subway stop where the World's Fair was. And hopefully that should cover it. Okay, so this is a very New York poem. Further notes from the underground. I first rode the subway on my father's lap, on the broad seats of upholstered straw. The world was bigger then, streets steeper. I scrambled up the steps of the sky-high station, walked under the turnstile, and made the long journey to the dinosaur bones in the universe of skyscrapers. I first rode the subway on my father's lap, on his gabardine coat in the clattering car, beside my humming mother, my New World brother, the ghosts of trolley cars sparking below. My small hands gripped his dark sleeve as we tunneled under the East River through the eardrum pressure, the car crammed with blank stares and cardboard ads for Luckies and Camels and slim women laughing against a backdrop of 80 proof. The years chugged by and the stars grew fainter in the Queen's night. Hair cropped up in surprising places. I was 12:30 on the elevated platform when the Flushing local barreled into Bliss Street, jerked open its doors, and lured me away from the oaths that echoed off the crushed stone underbelly of the L, from the nominal hedges and dog-drizzled hydrants, the parochial fists of my peers, the conductor's yawp, leaving Sunnyside behind in a blur of dark brick and TV antennas blindly stabbing at the sky. I first met Walt Whitman in the robin's egg blue cars, suspended in view of my draft board between the winter Tet offensive and the spring assassinations, between the uniforms of Wall Street and the genes of my generation. Oscar Williams made the introduction as I held the cold silver pole in my other hand, above the huddled houses massed in view of the city's spires, side streets stuffed with our father's wheels locked in park. The subway shuttled me to the World's Fair, to the gutted globe suspended in a fountain. A few years before Jimmy's star-spangled banner fluttered in the shredding sky and regulation boots mired in the marshes of East Asia, I walked down the long ramps from Willets Point, the crowds congealing below, staking my claim on the sinuous lines, awaiting a glimpse of the future from GM, GE, and Ford. And all these years later, I'm still waiting. From the dawn of my first stubble, from the taut reins in my parents' grip, from my muzzled declarations of independence, the IRT whisked me from the landscape of crumpled Budweisers, from the regnant polyester, from the crucified Lord of my neighbors glaring down at me every few blocks. So I stood on the local platform, eyeing the expresses bolting by, emerging in the bearded Brooklyn of ecstatic prayer, the agnostic alleyways of the West Village.
Do you remember what was in the Futurama ride?
Which was the Futurama? Was which
That
one? Was that
was
GM? I remember loving it, and I did.
Yeah,
I meant
I've
did it many
interested to
times.
see what, because we went too, and
You would go
Remember-
by, and they had like kind of what'd you call them? Not dioramas exactly, but they were like
Yes, anyway.
you went in a car,
yeah, you went in a car.
went in a car
the
and-
car of the future.
and you would go and along the whole trip there were all these different scenarios. Families. Oh, let me say. So this is called Family Secrets, and there are a few things that I want to make sure people understand. The word attics means upstairs. It's spelled with T's, not with D's. Crooked cross is what the German, or maybe it was Yiddish, Hakenkreuz, which is the name for the swastika. And I pronounce it Krakow instead of Krakow because that's how my father pronounced it. You know, that's the pronunciation in I guess, Polish, obviously in Polish. Family secrets. When the dawn bombs blitzed Poland, gutting buildings, blasting the past off course, my parents, destined to never cross paths, 62 miles and a deity apart, suddenly veered towards each other. When black mustaches severed Poland between them and the white lab coats of the Reich were steeped in poison gas. When paranoia was proof of sanity, my father stored a stiletto in his calf-length boots, walking the night forests of forged identities and stolen Lugers from Krakow to the Russian East, before the ghettos were wrapped in barbed wire and the crooked cross plunged its crippling stake wherever it could. He kept walking under moonlight, surviving on roots. Watching other Jews herded in a town square, he weighed the risk of capture and compliance and continued. With Berlin breathing down his back, he reached his home, finding himself drafted into a Soviet uniform, kissing his parents goodbye, scraping the whiskers from his face, leaving his copper hair open to the sky, leaving the terrified addicts and their tremble, to ride the military trains, suture the skulls of soldiers at Stalingrad, where the woman who would hemorrhage me into the new world and name me in memory of his parents handed him his scalpels. My parents met because my father was a doctor and he drafted into the Russian army, and my mother was a nurse. That's how they met.
Was she also in the army?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, they met in the army because my mother volunteered. As a nurse, she was able to volunteer. Shoshana?
I guess we're doing questions as we go along.
I guess.
What do you mean by a deity apart?
Okay, by a deity apart, my mother's home was a Hasidic home, and my father's was Orthodox home. But by the time he left home, he wasn't really observant. But my mother had come from a very, very strict home. Actually, whenever I would ask my mother about her parents, the first thing she would always say is they were so religious.
Which one, Shoshana?
She must be.
She said it to me in English. Okay. February 5th, 1922. On my father's 14th birthday, the ink was drying on Rilke's notebook, the sonnets to Orpheus having found the fingers to release them. 9 years before Dali's clocks began to drape the landscape, the German mark was being unmoored and all Europe would pay. When heads of axes were being buried in the thick bark of trees, forearms bulging in the grip of angry muscle, my father's inflammatory hair his polyglot silence was simmering in the eastern ends of Poland. Before broths began to thin, tubers dominate dinner, and the beer halls turn rowdy. In the year of the birth of the Soviets, in the year Ulysses spoke English in Paris with a brogue. The next poem is called The Belzer Rebbe Comes to Stri. Stri was the town my mother grew up in, or the shtetl that my mother grew up in. And the Belzer Hasidim were the most influential and populous group of Hasidim in Europe before the war. Most of them didn't survive the war. So my mother, as I told you, came from a Hasidic family, but that family was not a Belzer family. It was a Zhidachov. Nobody heard of Zhidachov, but they were pretty well known back then. But one of her four brothers became a Belzer Chassid, her second oldest brother. None of her family survived the war. So her parents and her four brothers did not survive. But her second oldest brother became a Belzer Chassid. And my mother used to tell me the story of when the Belzer Rebbe came to her town, Stri. And so I loved listening to that story. And this is a poem that's that's inspired by that story. The Belzer Rebbe comes to Stri, and no one knew the war would come, that the dancers' beards would be torn from their faces in the same public squares where they danced with their white shirts leaping out of their pants, with their black hats falling over their eyes, with their feet forgetting every ache in the wonder of being alive. Fear was familiar, like staying home, locked and shuttered on Christmas. But this day, the streets belonged to the throngs, greeting the Belzer Rebbe in his wide-brimmed hat and long black coat, his pockets full of pleas, shoes for the children, wool for a sweater, oil for the lamp to read by at night. And the children came on their fathers' shoulders where heaven is within reach. And fathers danced with those small bodies aloft like sacred scrolls under the cirrus sky. Everywhere the Rebbe turned, he saw flowers twisting toward the sun, though the earth is dusty and well-trodden, though weeds spread unwatered. The Rebbe saw all that made the feet heavy of the dancers encircling him, and this made his feet heavy too. He heard the sobs swallowed up in the joyous melodies of the high-pitched voices, and he gulped deeply. His stomach growled with their hunger, his mouth parched, his eyes welled up, and he danced with abandon in the closed-off square, for they needed him to. And he sang through the breaks in his voice, and though God is so well hidden in the acts of the stranger, in the drunken gangs of crosstown Saturday nights, in the hunger heard in the beggar's cry, in the mortal fevers of children, the Rebbe must dance to hasten the day when every street will draw a song from our feet, when everyone will be their own Rebbe. And the thousands of footprints made one vast mosaic effaced in the wide-broomed morning. And years later, that day was transported in slivers to other Polish villages, Sobibor, Treblinka, Auschwitz. 9/10 of the memory vanished there. But the Rebbe was smuggled beardless to Palestine over his protests, for his wish was to share his followers' fate, the one thing they couldn't suffer. And the Rebbe's beard slowly grew back under the blue skies and narrow alleys of Jerusalem, but his feet never danced again.
Is that actually what happened?
Yeah.
How did he get to Palestine? How was he smuggled out?
Actually, I'm not exactly sure how he was smuggled out. This is going to be a hard story to tell. My parents had, basically my parents' social life in the United States was all Polish, Jewish refugees from World War II. And most of them had medical background. They were almost all the men especially were doctors, almost all of them. And some of the women were too. One of those women, her father was the assistant of the, happened to be the assistant of the Belzer Rebbe and looked very much like him. When they were coming to kill him, he sat there instead, and he got shot, and he was killed in place of the Rebbe. You can see why that's, yes, of course, because he looked like him, he wanted to save the Rebbe by being killed in his place. Okay. Ode to accents. Qumran, of course, is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. When I open my mouth, people hear Second Avenue Deli, pastrami on rye, sour pickles, rattling tracks of the local to Shea Stadium, Queens Boulevard staring at Manhattan's skyline. I affect the sound of falafel, borekas, baba ganoush, but everyone hears latkes sizzling in the background. When my parents opened their mouths, people heard borscht, stuffed cabbage, gefilte fish, Slavic winters, each W a V, each TH a T. They never spoke to me in their mother tongues, preferring the language of my native New York, hoping I'd blend in like they couldn't. Our names bore our ancestors on our backs from one exile to another, a covenant of sound stretching back to the craggy hills of Jerusalem, the caves of Qumran, a shibboleth awaiting its resurrection. Words of my parents, a living link to the world turned to ash by 1945. There are two longer poems in here. I'm going to read a section from one of them. It's called The Ingathering of Exiles at 33 Rehov Ramban in Jerusalem. I spent my junior year of college in Jerusalem, at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and our apartment was in 33 Rehov Ramban. 5 of us rented the place, and it was quite an incredible year. I do mention the Joshua Light Show, which was a light show that was shown at times in rock concerts. You know, they were like, I don't know, it was pretty innovative at the time. And this is in honor of the hills born around Jerusalem and the carob fruit bearing old world beads of honey in its brown thick pods. This is in honor of the sun teaching one to leave quietly, but with a big impression. And I am still learning to listen to the fluorescent lamp above the desk where I write, the phosphorus flaring at the tip of the wooden match, the hum of the escalator taking you up to boarding in America. And I am just learning to look at the curtained libraries behind flower pots of domesticated cactus, at the streets that stare straight at the sun, at the eyebrows of the Midtown mime as he lifts his hat off his bald head, hoping for loud money, at your teeth barely imprinting your lower lip at the cusp of a shudder. And I was never on my way to India, though I made it to the Western Wall, the Jerusalem forest, the open market of still shivering chickens and lead weights telling you how much grapefruit, persimmons, cracked olives, or kohlrabi is weighing down your blue plastic baskets and will cover your kitchen table for $5. We were at the crossroads between worlds on the trade routes of Africa, Asia, and Europe, somewhere between the grandparents I never knew and the grandchildren I may never know, somewhere between a torchlight procession up a night-soaked Masada chanting, "Let my people go," and the Joshua Light Show pulsing to "I'm free," somewhere between the 10 Commandments and 2001. We were brought together by student loans, Jewish summer camps, and scarred parents. We were brought together because on our way back from the wall, a beggar stopped me, putting my hand on his herniated stomach, making the sale. We were brought together by long hair, liberal arts, and 200 people needing a place to crash in Jerusalem. We were brought together because we spoke the common language of denim, hookahs, and sleeping bags on beaches, stairwells, and parking lots that today are five-star hotels, and nothing's as innocent as it seems. We were brought together because the long-haired septuagenarian sculptor and his medical hypnotist wife needed neighbors, and Danny, Kenny, Mark, Rick, and Saul needed a home, and Jerusalem needed some exiles from Woodstock Nation. Someone had to keep the party going. Someone had to disseminate beat literature to the bearded and to the browless. Some had to usher in the Sabbath in a suit and sneakers. Someone had to break the news that television is one long commercial. And you know, I should have never lent my handmade love beads to the 16-year-old Orthodox girl who promised to return them at the starlit fork in the road the next night and left me only the starlit fork in the road, which was a greater gift I still don't totally fathom. And I was poised between the West with its roads full of horsepower and horizons, and the Middle East, which could have housed the haven I never had. I was poised before 7 years of growth and 7 years of growing confusion, 7 years of affection in abundance and abundant disaffection, and they were all the same 7 years. And I don't know how much to reveal, for I was just learning to love and to struggle for independence for the next 20 years. And I was not surprised that my parents read my mail. I was not surprised that my desk drawers were fair game. But I was surprised to get an unsigned, typewritten 6-page letter from my father the August day after coming down the snake path, to float in the Dead Sea, sitting cross-legged in the buoyant waters with a circle of friends, the deep blue of the sky washing out, ringed by the desert mountains, hiking to the falls of Engedi, where the waters wash through the green cracks in the sun-baked surroundings, where the waters trickle past huge boulders, where the waters fall from one peak to another, and I watch them fall over my face, all over my face. And the next noon, I crashed into my father's letter. I crashed into 6 pages of open wounds. I crashed into my whole life paraded before me. And you know what? I didn't recognize it. But I also didn't recognize my father's pain. I didn't recognize you could spend 19 years running from one womb to another. And there's a holy grail if there ever was one. And I didn't recognize my pain either, turning it into dramatic readings of something so raw it left us in stitches. And I never quite grasped the domino theory directly linking masturbation to the new left, and how all of this explained my only getting a B in calculus. But those letters were surely impatient to be read, languishing in my drawer as my father, stirred by some paternal moral imperative, pried my dresser for evidence of my allegiance to the best minds of my generation and hit pay dirt. And I couldn't see past the uppercase threats and underlined ultimatums. But I tried to believe I didn't care. I tried to exercise my economic dependence by every which way but work. And I needed the space of an ocean or two to feel free from the head to foot scrutiny of 40 years of clinical experience. So began a correspondence, culminating face to face as the rainy season threatened and Jerusalem started sleeping with its windows shut. I found myself at 1 p.m., 3 blocks from 33 Rehov Ramban, my father insisting on stopping in as 2 bearded crashers slept in my room, the future Shabtai and Chaim, who that day were still very much Stewie and Harvey. My father swooped by and stormed out yelling, "I can't have such friends." "You can't tell me who my friends can be." Stewie adding later, "Good thing he couldn't see my dreams." And we board a bus to go anywhere, reaching the Hebrew U station where bags are frisked for bombs. And my father fumes, "I can't have such friends." He is shaking. He is seeing Harvey's head buried in the pillow, his hair spilling on the sheets. He is seeing his son tie his own shoelaces, not follow in his footsteps. He is seeing books the Soviets would have banned, demonstrating around the house. He is shaking, saying he will kill me. He will kill me, himself, and my mother too, who replies, "Not me." And I'm thinking I should run, Hide till they leave, take a job, anything. I should go to the bathroom in the first building I find, outside which my mother advises me, don't aggravate him. Agree to anything, then do what you want. She is the amnesiac witness. She is a fount of family myth. She is a singer at frequent parties with a loud laugh and louder dresses. My father waits on a low stone bench with two photographs, one of Timothy Leary sitting on his knees, the other, my brother, in comparable posture, holding his year-old son, convincing my father that my brother too is a psychedelic experimenter. He begins to cry, where did I go wrong? And I offer him anything, for he is the Wailing Wall, where he wanted me to swear to my conversion to his principles of faith. I believe in perfect faith that I should cut my hair and shave my silly beard, obey my parents and not immature professors. For surely I am the will-less pawn hiding among the liberal arts. I am the damaged DNA disgracing the martyred ancestors. I am the son who eats too little meat. I am the son who takes God too seriously. I am the son who finally succumbed to wearing a hairnet to sleep at the age of 14 before all control was lost. I am the son who confused Kaddish with a great poem. I am the son who perceived his father out of proportion. I am the skewed proportions. I am the lost control. I am the endless adolescence with overdue books. I am the diminishing hope of survivors. I am my grandfather's chin under a scraggly red beard. I am the living memory of the errors of my uncle's ways, of his grandfather's straw-filled barn in the Polish countryside as police combed for communist agitators. I am the agitation, the blue-eyed agitation. I am the contraband snuck through the border whispering, Russia, Russia. I am the 6-word profession of faith, one for each million who died in vain. I am the lost address book with the smudged print. I am my father's burnt library. I am my father's letter. I am too much my father's son. I am the lost childhood wandering in the cordoned off streets of Jerusalem, Independence Day, with the plastic hammers singing on skulls, with the fragrance of fried fat filling sidewalks, with the crowds coming from 100 different directions, from 100 different countries, for 100 different reasons, watching the sky fill with fireworks from the chief rabbinate's roof, and the night is streaked with color, and your ears are flushed with a dozen languages, and your mouth fills with a dozen tastes and a dozen non sequiturs and a dozen incipient kisses. And why doesn't this last forever? Instead of ending one day back in the hilly heat of summer, labeling boxes that send my life back into exile till the coming generations.
I don't see it's on here anymore. Oh,
Right.
oh, okay, I guess.
Maybe the light shining.
Let's see. Oh, here we go.
Mark, you should show them the picture in the back of the book of you when you had big hair.
What's the hairnet image? Did you wear a hairnet because it was so unruly?
Yeah, my father made me do that.
In the evening?
At night, when I
At
went to
night.
bed. When I went to bed.
And then in the morning?
No, I had, well, I combed it out a little bit. But yeah, he wanted to,
Was that in the 70s by any chance?
no, that was actually 19, let's see, I was in 10th grade, 1966.
So can you show us that picture?
It's small for people who are,
Well, you can hold it up for the people who are online.
okay, these are some family pictures. So that's the one on top is my brother's bar mitzvah. I'm the small guy. So that's from around the time of that last poem, 10 years later and 10 years after that. But there's this small. Okay, so This is called My Ex Wedding at my ex in-laws. This is from 1970. It's from the years like 70 to 73. My ex wedding at my ex in-laws. A sunny late August surrounds the expected canopy, a black and white prayer shawl on 4 underfed poles, with a thick-necked Throg's Neck Bridge in the backdrop and a broad Bronx horizon. After fasting from each other for a week, I enter the woman-filled bride's room and lower your sheer veil. The males singing me back out, beards in abundance, with the rabbis bringing 2 genuine Brooklyn God-fearing witnesses to the ceremony, half filled with Holocaust survivors who left their faith in Europe. And I am groomed in a white robe and a red beard and gold-rimmed glasses and a black sash dividing my upper half from my lower half. And my upper half remembers the days, while my lower half remembers the nights. And my lower half thinks it's my upper half, but my upper half thinks. And the days began one night when you smiled at me from our freshman directory under the glare of my tensor lamp. And I don't believe in fate. You barely believe in marriage. Our parents are in disbelief, and our friends are hungry. I am under the canopy as you approach and circle me 7 times. I am under 22 and under the impression I'm an adult. And every rabbi calls me a king in the eyes of the tradition and then summons me like a page to his office. But I am well trained in adolescence, and I am afraid of my father and can't admit it. I am afraid of tomorrow and don't know it. I feel no fear. I am beaming, for Juliet is the sun. And the wine is waiting in the rabbi's palm, and the pale gold ring is waiting in my brother's pocket. The ancient temple is waiting to be remembered. And on the heels of the muffled shatter of glass wrapped in a cloth napkin, the band erupts and the food breaks out, and we forget how we've been legislated around every corner. Our love is now legal in New York. The children we will one day never have would be legitimate. Even God approves. Is this what you meant sitting on the edge of the stone pool saying you wanted to marry as we were growing up together, as we were discovering ourselves in each other, spending months on the way talking till dawn, thrilling to the light touch of our fingertips, passing a lit cigarette because our lips had not yet been introduced? Is this what we meant? Did our bodies mean to become strangers so quickly after slowly becoming fast friends? I was barely 19 when we met. You were almost 21. We were a festival waiting to be founded. We were flesh closing over an open wound. And you brought your suspicions. I brought my guilt. And so our parents met. Our fathers talking turkey, our mothers speaking mink. And what could we think, having already played house for 2 years? And our pre-marriage counselor telegraphs congratulations from Toronto. And our parents telegraph criticisms from all over the place. And we were warned not to marry while the moon was waning. We were warned not to stare at the late August sun from under a makeshift canopy. And how did we get there? Through the jealousies, through the letters burning in tin trash baskets, through all the threats to never live happily ever after at the top of our lungs. How did we get there? On the way to embracing across a white handkerchief, 2 lone chairs dancing in the air. Would we ever be this close again? And under the yellow canvas tent in the backyard, whirling in separate circles till we burst out of orbit, hands fondling the air, throats throwing biblical mating calls across the trampled lawn, and my brother breaks in out of nowhere in 20 years to twirl with me around the close circumference of blood on blood. And I want to cry on his collar and laugh 2 pent-up decades worth, but sing instead words only our feet understand. And the ground feels like it will hold us up forever, as 4 friends held up the fragile poles supporting the prayer shawl under every man's sky and every woman's sky and every sky that ever lived. But nothing stands still long enough, not the sun on August 26th, not the immortal feelings of 19, not the smile that rivets you to a stranger's face in a book of student photographs. Not the first kiss that promises to place a whole world naked before you and delivers. Not the last glance across the white bridge of a handkerchief when your entire weight is suspended in air and you find privacy in each other's eyes while the world below is staring at you. Not the frail canopy that folds like a stretcher and takes its magic show around the next blind curve.
You know, I love that. It feels like the previous poems are like a vanished world. It's like Roman Vishniak, A Vanished World. This poem feels like nuclear energy, rock and roll, contemporary in a way. Gonzo, Mark Elber. That's great.
Thank you.
You know?
Moses took us two more short poems. Moses took a second wife. Moses took a second wife under the shadow of the desert moon, his staff growing heavier each winter, when rains swim in brown rivers through the rough-cut mountains and small plants plot their way out of the earth, while his people walked away from their past towards a greater past, and the sun walked quickly across the sky. Moses entered the tent of his second wife, parting the darkened folds, and knew warmth and knew earth like he hadn't since first shedding his shoes in a soft oasis of murmuring stalks. He remembered the buoyant Nile and the moist limbs cradling his infant flesh. Moses opened his mouth and awe emerged, and his tongue suddenly lightened, spoke secrets heard only at the birth of the ear. Moses filled his hands and felt his blood pool. He lifted his head in a laugh, famed through the Fertile Crescent, and that laugh fathered all psalms, and that laugh was the rushing sound of the waters rivering Eden. Last piece. Your small hands. You began as a kiss in an English garden. The nurse held you up, 5 ruddy pounds of instinct, and your one-syllable song, the father of all you will ever utter. You who gravitate towards the magnet of any open door, dwarfing my dreams as you run, room to room, laughing over your shoulder, hoping to be chased. Your small lips coronate the breast. Your torso is an open embrace. Your hands lift your last Cheerios to my lips. A mirror is a baby babbling back at you. A piano, a singing oasis of wood and ivory. Every puddle a beach. You are a magician with nothing up your sleeve but the softest skin. That's the story for today. Thank you. If anyone has questions out here, you can unmute yourself and ask. Everybody can unmute themselves at this point.
Mark, tell us who's here with us. Who's on screen?
Okay. Let me show you. I'm gonna walk around. No, it's better for you to see. Because only I get to see, and that's not fair to everybody else. You can say hello.
Oh, great.
Oh, Lev's awake, okay.
Yeah, I fell asleep.
It's okay.
Where in Poland were your parents from?
My father was from Stanislavov, which is now called something else like Frank Ivanovsk or Franco Ivanovsk. My mother was from another town not far away, like I said, about 100 kilometers, called Stry. Now they're both in the Ukraine. Okay.
Hi, everybody.
How much older is your brother?
6 years.
6 years. Okay.
You know,
Thank you.
I'm not any kind of expert at all on poetry. Okay, I enjoy poetry.
Just speak loudly so everybody can hear. I'll repeat it. I'll repeat what you say.
Some of the, your poems sound a little, almost like prose. Is that, what's the difference actually? Like the one that you just read, I think.
The last
Sounds
one.
A little bit like prose.
Well, I try to, I think one thing that they have in common is, at least in the way that I write, I try to write in spoken language, in language that's not, that doesn't feel artificial.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's an important part. Generally, I would say poetry tends to be tighter,
Yeah,
tighter, and that's, there is a thing that people call poetic prose or prose poetry, which tends to incorporate a lot of imagery, a lot of heightened language, but never, but remains in a prose style. So that, part of that is also how do you phrase it? In prose usually uses
Well, you
paragraphs.
capture a lot of imagery.
Yeah, I'd focus a lot on that.
Yeah.
Just Bernie has his hand up. Go ahead.
Yes,
Can everybody hear the questions?
now when you're in,
Yes.
Okay, good.
when you're in school, do you have to read the basic poets like Robert Frost and Walt Whitman and Kerouac and Ginsberg? Now, the last two, Kerouac and Ginsberg, that was the decade of McCarthyism and all that other stuff. If you go to a public school, is the curriculum set like, you don't get to choose what poets you read? So if you want to read poets that are not as common as Frost and Carl Sandburg, for example, Emily Dickinson, Edgar Allan Poe, who were the poets that influenced you and that you like to read before you even entered high school?
Oh, well, nobody before I entered high school. That was for sure. Did you hear the question? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so when I went to school, they certainly didn't give you Kerouac or Ginsberg to read.
I wish you did.
But the basic thing that we did read was parts of that Oscar Williams thing, which was 20 major American poets. And so we did read Whitman and we did read Emily Dickinson. But the thing that really got me interested in poetry was in 10th grade. Actually, when I was 14, I had a substitute teacher for one class, just one class, and she gave us an E.E. Cummings poem, and I fell in love with that poem. That was the first thing that ever affected me. And then I started. I read through the entire, cover to cover. I read, it was a 500-something page anthology, the Oscar Williams anthology, which I read cover to cover. In school we just dipped in here and there, but I got interested in it. And then the next thing that really affected me was freshman year of college. In the spring summer, we had to take this at Penn. We had to take I guess Introduction to Fiction in the fall. It was required, and then Introduction to Poetry in the spring. And before we had our textbook in the Introduction to Poetry, we got a Xerox sheet of a poem by Allen Ginsberg called "A Supermarket in California," which I really, really loved. And so then I started pursuing it on my own. I went to the bookstore and bought they had all his books, and I bought them and started to read them. And it just so happens that I studied with him, or apprenticed, it was called, in 1981 at Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado. And I became his chauffeur for a little while because he didn't have a car. And the first thing I did was take him to a supermarket. It was an incredible experience to be living that poem in a certain sense. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yes.
I have a couple questions.
Over what period of time did you write these?
These over a long period of time. I mean, I started writing in about 1967, but these were written probably in the last 30 years. I tried to assemble them also. In other words, they're not all the poems that I wrote, but they're a fraction of them, but I tried to make the book coherent.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Jeff.
One question is, like, when you write this on your computer or freehand, are you aware of how it's going to look on the page? In other words, just like I sometimes get a lot of how the poet has structured or made the architecture of punctuation, short phrases versus long phrases. Sometimes it tells me a lot about the poet. Are you aware of that?
Very, very aware.
And
actually also because I often tend to write in long lines,
yeah,
that the lines were longer than would fit on the normal line length in the published book. So we went over that very carefully, how I wanted to, to relineate the poems in the printed book,
And then
because the
another-
margins were not as
Another
wide.
short question just about, I was really aware of a lot of the beauty of the alliteration.
Mhm.
There's a lot of alliteration in your poetry. What about rhyme?
I
that
use some
something-
internal rhyme, but it sounds so artificial most of the time that I never use it. Never use it. But I do use some internal rhyme occasionally. Jeff.
This is beautiful poetry.
Thank you.
It's the imagery, someone has already remarked, is outstanding. It carries you to the place where you are. It's also deeply personal and invested. It's not detached poetry at all. So the question I have for you, Rabbi Mark, is what's happening to Mark Elber as you go through the process of creating this poetry? Do you feel a transformation from the point you start? You must have an idea in your mind as you put it to paper and complete the project. Is there something transformative going on here with you? What does it accomplish for you when you complete a particular work?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. First of all, very often I don't know what I don't have an idea. I have a feeling, and writing is a process for me. It is part of the process of discovering what I'm feeling. So I'm just trying to get something off the screen. Okay, so that's one of the things that happens. That so I discover what is important to me as I'm working on it. There's an element of catharsis, but there's also an element of an internal need to express. So I don't even know necessarily what I'm going to express or what I need to express, but there's this internal drive to want to sit down and do it. I mean, there's also an internal drive to avoid it. That's really, and maybe that's why there are 30 years worth of work in here. He was very successful at avoiding. But I would say that but there is this element of constantly working, trying to capture something that feels elusive that I'm chasing, and I'm not always sure what it is. But I know when it's finished. I have a sense when I've gotten it to the best of my ability. Although many times I will come back over and over to different poems because I know that there's something that doesn't work with them. And either musically doesn't work or rhythmically doesn't work, or imagistically doesn't work. So I'm always trying to go back. And a lot of times I don't see it. A lot of times it takes me months to see it. Like I'm going back on poems now that from months ago, and I said, wow, those words really are not as strong as the other lines, and I got to get rid of them. Go ahead.
Which reminds me, your comment just prompted something else. Have you ever gone back and taken a look at something and you said, my gosh, I really wish I hadn't said that, either because it resonates differently 20, 30 years after the fact?
I'll tell you one thing. Certain things, the answer to that briefly is yes, but there's another. I mean, also, reading here feels a little different than reading in a more anonymous situation, in a situation that doesn't have, that has a Jewish feeling, but not necessarily a traditional feeling. So I feel things that are a little bit less traditional. I feel a little more self-conscious reading here, but I didn't want to censor myself. But I did once or twice. I think, boy, I wish I could have gone from this line to the next, to 2 lines down, but it wouldn't have worked as well. So I did have that feeling. Sylvia.
Do you keep a diary at all?
Yes.
I kind of thought so.
But the diary is completely different from this. I have been keeping a journal since about 1975. So I have like a shelf. Not anymore. I did for years.
Yeah.
But that's really for just, expressing my feelings and keeping a kind of a log of what's happened. But it's not, I don't sit and work on it at all. Right. Whereas this, I really labor over and over and over. Shoshana?
In this book, Headstone.
Yeah.
have all of the poems in this book, even though some of them may be 30 years old, have they all been reworked since, I don't know, since you got your MFA, since you started going to work?
Did you hear that question? Okay, I got it. Okay, I'll repeat it. So Shoshana asked, even though there's some of these poems are 30 years old, have I reworked them? Over the years, especially since I got an MFA in 2017. And I would say a lot of the poems are newer. A lot of the poems are from the time that I started the MFA program from 2015 to the present. But some of the older poems, I did tighten them up a little bit over time as I was reworking the manuscript, because I started the first manuscript I put together in 1993, and almost nothing of that has survived. But a couple of the long poems, one of the long poems, the title poem, but I've tightened it up since then, trying to, cut out extra words and make it, more, intensify it in a way. Does that answer your question?
I agree with Jeff. I mean, the poems are beautiful and personal, but it seems like in the ones you've chosen to read, it's like an elegy for a lost world of your parents and your childhood. And then you end with Lev and his Cheerios. So what's happened in the last 20 years almost regarding content or your feeling? Is your writing different? Are themes different other than elegiac?
Yes, they are, but I wanted to keep the thematically it consistent, because that seems to be very important in the world of publishing today. In the past, books of poetry were often just assembling the last 80 pages that a person wrote, whereas Robert Frost said, I know he's an older guy, but he said that if there are 28 poems in a book, the book itself should be the 29th poem. The construction of the book itself should be the 29th. And in a way, and I think that idea has become more and more dominant. So I had to assemble the book in a way that made it a consistent whole. So a lot of other poems that are on different subjects completely, they couldn't make the cut for this book. Hopefully the next one, hopefully there'll be another one that it will make the cut for.
I am gonna go.
Okay, thank you. See you
start
later.
heating things up.
Okay.
I'll see those of you who are coming to the party.
Any other questions from the Zoom? Okay. Well, thank you all. I appreciate you coming very much. Yep. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Mazal tov.
Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
When I see you in person, I'll get you to sign my book.
I'd be honored.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.